Hey guys, welcome to Tim's Vinyl Confessions. I'm Tim Derling, and I know I said that my last episode of the deep dive, I had the privilege of talking to Mr. Tom Brislin, so that was going to be the end of the Kansas deep dive, but I thought I would give people, I guess you could call this a bonus episode, like a bonus track. Basically, talking about a couple albums here that are, very much in the Kansas orbit that we didn't talk about, and actually they were recommended to me by some folks. Before I do that, though, I just do want to remind everybody that my Kansas book's still very much available. Let It Be Your Guide, the Kansas album review. Some fine people put their knowledge to work here. Available through Amazon. I'll have the link below. And Jeff Wagner, who wrote the foreword to this book, worked with the band at Inside Out, recommended this CD to me when we were talking about the early days of Kansas. It's called Proto-Kaw, Early Recordings from Kansas, 1971 to 1973. This CD came out in 2002, but the recordings are much older than that. And why this is of interest is because Mr. Kerry Livgren is the main guy behind this band. I mean, this is a band that would morph into one of the versions of Kansas. Like, as diehard Kansas fans know, there were 2 or 3 versions of Kansas that eventually solidified into the 6-piece band that got the contract and began their career. So I was skeptical because, both the albums I'm going to talk about, I guess you could call them side projects. And that's not something I usually concentrate on. If I'm into a band, I usually just tend to follow the band, for the most part. Always exceptions. But for the most part, I just tend to stick with, the main band albums. But I was intrigued about this Proto-Kaw stuff, the stuff that Kerry was writing before Kansas started recording. I believe that's him right there. Pretty unmistakable. These are actually some really good recordings. Cleaned up quite a lot. I mean, this was never stuff that was on a major label. There are, let's see, how many tracks are on this thing? This is not something I listen to all the time. There are 9 songs on here. And I'll see if this will show up without glare, if you can read those or not. Now, you may recognize a couple of those, specifically tracks 4 and 7. 4 is Bellix's, and 7 is In Comudro. Yes, those are songs that Kansas would end up recording. Bellix's ended up on the debut, and In Comudro, or In Comudro Hymn to the Atman, ended up on Song for America. They're in a more primitive form here. The vocalist on these songs is a guy named Lynn Meredith. I was talking with Jeff Wagner about that. To me, he sounds a lot like Ian Anderson from Jethro Tull. Not a bad voice, but not Steve Walsh. Definitely not Steve Walsh. And I gotta say, although I do hear hints of what would become Kansas, not just on the 2 songs that they ended up recording, but on some of these other tracks, I gotta tell you, this stuff's out there. This stuff's out there. There are just horn blasts out of nowhere, and some of it's really, really dark, and really not sure what to think of some of this stuff, but it is fascinating. It's pretty complex music for a bunch of guys in their early 20s. I mean, as Kansas fans, I think we can agree, Kerry Livgren was a genius, still is, he's still around. And, but to hear this early material is really eye-opening. In some ways, he kind of toned it down for Kansas. Which is kind of hard to believe. So that's Proto-Kaw, early recordings from Kansas, 1971 to 1973. And I think the use of Kansas here, it refers to the state, because that says Topeka right there, which of course is where they're all from. A couple different drummers on some of the different tracks here, but for the most part, it's a steady band. Now, this music would not have... I can't see this stuff getting through to a major audience or a major label, but it is pretty fascinating to listen to here. So thanks, Jeff, for turning me on to this. If nothing else, guys, if you're a fan of early Kansas and you want to hear a couple early versions of songs that they would end up recording, this is worth picking up. And I do have to say this, I have to mention this. It was an absolute thrill for me when I found out that a couple of fans, Greg, I can't think of the other guy's name, but they basically did a Kansas tour. And I understand that because I did that in Toronto. I did the Rush tour, right? All the landmarks. They ended up presenting Kerry with a copy of my book, and Kerry was nice enough to post about it, which got me a lot of book sales. And it was just nice to have a seal of approval from, I mean, he's the guy, right? He's Mr. Kansas, right? Wasn't for him, there'd be no Kansas. This group that we all love so much, right? You know, everybody that's way into this band. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Now moving on, this other CD is one that a few people have talked to me about. I'm doing this, I want to talk about this basically as a dedication to bassist Billy Greer, who recently stepped down from Kansas. He'd been a stalwart member of the band since 1986. He was in Streets with Steve Walsh, but then he stepped into the new reconfigured Kansas when they got back together for the Power album. Of course, Dave Hope was not part of that reunion, so they needed a bass player, and they got a great bass player. Not only did they get a really good bass player, but they got a really good vocalist, not just backing vocals, but a lead singer in his own right. And Billy would take the occasional lead vocal on a Kansas track like Look at the Time and also Summer. And as the story goes, we know that Steve Walsh was not interested in working on new Kansas material. That's why there was no new Kansas music between 2000, when they did Somewhere to Elsewhere, and then the Prelude Implicit, way ahead to 2016. Steve just did not want to do any Kansas material. Well, the other guys in the band kind of had the itch, and so in 2009, this album appeared, again on Inside Out Music, and the band and the album called Native Window. I'm not really sure where the name comes from, but I do know that there's a Native American influence, you know, obviously the name Kansas. But I mean, it's all Kansas personnel. So it's Billy Greer on bass and vocals, Richard Williams on guitar, Philly Hart on drums, and David Ragsdale on violin and I assume guitar. And so this is, let's see, song titles are not listed on the back. That's kind of annoying. It's just a 10-song album, and a few people have mentioned this to me. You know, you should check out the Native Window album. And like I said, I'm not one to do the side projects thing and the extra offshoot groups, but I thought this is all Kansas personnel. You know, it's a little bit like the Anderson Bruford Wakeman Howe album. I mean, that's essentially a Yes album. I wouldn't say that's the case here, and you know, it's not bad, but for anybody that might think this is a substitute Kansas album, it's not. I almost call it poppy in a way, poppy rock, almost leaning towards new country, like maybe, this is a weird comparison, but like, you remember Bon Jovi did Who Says You Can't Go Home with Jennifer Nettles? It's kind of like that, some of it. And if that's your cup of tea, and you like Kansas, then you'll love this. Billy Greer sings great. You know, the band sounds good. It's not prog. I don't hear any prog here at all. I don't hear anything on here that makes me go, boy, I wish they'd saved that for a Kansas album. I mean, when they did this, they didn't know there'd be another Kansas album. So I understand they were creative and they wanted to do something. But I just would say, don't go into this thinking you're going to hear like an alternate universe version of a Kansas album from 2009. That's just not the case. This might grow on me, you know, I got it, I'm not getting rid of it, but yeah, it's just something I wanted to, but I wanted to talk about it mainly because Billy Greer steps down. You know, I know he had some personal tragedies, and he's now stepping down from the band he'd been a steady member of. I mean, aside from Richard Williams and Phil Ehart, he's the next longest serving member of Kansas that was still in the band, and you know, I wish him all the best. So just wanted to talk about a couple other things that were in the Kansas radar. Maybe some of you out there have all the solo albums, you know, all of Kerry's albums, all of Steve Walsh's albums, the John Elephant stuff, all of it. You know, this is just my opinion, but I wanted to talk about these two, the Proto-Kaw and the Native Window. What do we think of these albums? You know, I'm in the comments, you know, what am I hearing that, you know, what do I need to pay specific attention to that I'm not getting with these? You can always, you know, I can always change my mind about things, and I'd rather end up liking stuff that I already own. So there you go. So this is it. This is the absolute end of the Kansas deep dive. And I don't want to say too much yet, but there is another deep dive coming because I've got a new book coming. And a few of you know what it is. I've shared it with a few people, but I'm really excited. It is not Kansas related. It's not even Prague related, but stay tuned. And yeah, link to order the Kansas book, and all of my books will be below. And looking forward to bringing you more shows. I want to thank everybody who contributed to this book and everybody who bought the book. And, you know, just a shout out to all the Kansas fans. It's been a really, really fun experience doing this. It's actually, as big a fan as I was, it's deepened my appreciation for this band. Listening to everybody talk about what this band has meant to them over the years. So there you go. Thanks for watching this edition of Tim's Final Confessions. We'll see you later.